Greetings, my fellow Americans. Today I would like to talk to you about censorship in Montana. And for everyone else out there, I'm sure in the world, the word censorship means, pretty standard stuff. The government or somebody else comes along and strikes a word or says you can't, or takes something out of a video or a movie or something else and censors its content. In other words, prevents the public from seeing it or anyone else from seeing it. Except this is pretty much how governments who are corrupt work. They censor content they don't want people to see. And Montana is certainly no exception to this. In fact, they've actually created a law that prevents that very thing from happening. Now, in every single case that's been out there that I'm aware of since Rodney King that has gotten national publicity has been because police misconduct has been recorded on a video. It's either most of the time it's recorded by people who are bystanders, people who are not involved in the issue or the situation or the circumstance. They happen to be there, they happen to see it, they turn on their phone, they turn on a video camera, they do whatever, and they record what they see. Rodney King was being seen beaten and particularly heard being assaulted verbally by the cops who attacked him, who beat him. The same thing went with Floyd. The Floyd's issue this last year in dealing with that led to the Black Lives Matters rise and the whole nonsense of everything that happened, both for the Republican, Democratic, the oppressed, the authorities, all of that mess. And whichever side of the political spectrum you fall on that issue, you have to acknowledge it was a mess. We had protests, we had property damage, destruction, we had law enforcement officials acting out of appropriate conduct. We had rioters who were throwing Molotov cocktails. We had all kinds of things, and I'm not going to lay blame on who did what, but it was nonsense. But it was all started because a bystander was allowed to videotape Floyd being laid on the ground and suffocated essentially for 8 minutes. In Montana, not legal. Can't do it. And it's because of a law called Privacy and Communications Act. Now, the Privacy and Communications Act is actually, for the most part, a decent law. I mean, not every law is black and white bad from start to finish. And it's probably true about most laws, but they start under the pretense of being laws to preserve order or actually to serve a purpose. However, MCA section 458213, section 2, actually reads that a person who records or causes to be recorded a conversation by use of a hidden electronic or mechanical device that reproduces a human conversation without the knowledge of all parties of the conversation is guilty of a crime. Now, I read most of that verbatim from the law. But the interesting part here, and the part that's difficult, is because they don't describe or define what the word hidden means within the law or anywhere else within the MCA, Montana Code annotated laws. The courts, however, have interpreted repeatedly, and that includes all the way up to the state Supreme Court, that the word hidden means not seen by the person being recorded. So it doesn't matter if a whole crowd of people see you holding your iPhone. If the person being recorded does not see it, is not aware of it, it's considered to be a violation of this law. So, surprise, surprise, if what had happened to Floyd, if what happened to Rodney King, or any of the other dozens of cases that have popped up over the last year, had actually been recorded in Montana, the person recording it would be guilty of a crime, arrested, charged, the offending content confiscated. That's the law in Montana, and that's how it's being interpreted. And to prove this, I'm going to bring up a case that I've talked about on my blog, if you've happened to have read my blog at monspiracy.wordpress.com. And that's the case of Dave Burgert. Now, I say this in advance. I'm not sure if that's the actual proper pronunciation of his name. It could be Burgert. I'm not really sure because I've only seen it written. I've not actually heard it pronounced. I've never met Dave Burgert. I have no one who has actually come into contact with me with specific knowledge. My knowledge about Dave Burgert's background comes from both the media and from private individuals who've put information about this case online. But I know enough people personally who have run across the circumstance and the situation that I believe the credibility of the side of Dave Burgert's defense well over that of the prosecutors and the law enforcement involved. Basically, if you recognize the name Dave Burgert, you might recognize the name Project 7. Project 7 was a case he was supposedly wrapped into, a great big conspiracy. Supposedly, there were 7 people that were getting together with the intention of gathering weapons and overthrowing the local government by murdering the sheriff and the police chief at that time. Interestingly enough, no one was ever charged with any conspiracy elements, any elements of this alleged militia or anything dealing with it. It was a complete fabrication, a complete story that went nowhere except in the media to brand these people. And guess where that information came from? It came from the officials who were involved in the case, who wanted to feed that information to the media, and the media just ran with it without any kind of collaboration, any kind of details. They simply took the government's information and ran with it because the truth was far less, how do I say, sunny to the police. And this is what actually happened. Dave Burgert, now, just a quick little aside, and to clarify, Dave Burgert was convicted of a felony at the age of 17. At the age of 17, he took someone's horse, rode it around for the night, returned it the next day. The owner never pressed charges, but the state did. Therefore, he ended up with a felony on his record. Therefore, he was a felon by strictest definition. He had committed a felony as a minor. He apparently was prosecuted as an adult, and he did have a felony on his record. Now in Montana, up to the early 2000s, and these laws might have changed in the last 10 or so years as we've had more gun-related violence popping up. But at the time, in the 2000s, a person in Montana, after they completed their supervision for their felony, they actually got the right to own guns again, to actually possess guns again, and to use them. Not an issue. Except the federal government, doesn't see it that way. The federal government has laws that say that any felon cannot own a gun. Now, once again, another subject we'll have to deal with another time because I don't have time to talk about it in this video, will be nexus to the crimes, which is an entirely different issue, but it deals with what the United States Supreme Court has said can legally be imposed upon somebody commission even of a felony, and that is that a person who's committed a crime must actually have a nexus to the crime for any supervision or limitation they are placed upon them. If there's no weapon or no gun involved in the commission of a crime, the United States Supreme Court has said you can't actually impose a restriction on that person's use of a gun because a gun and no violence was actually used in the crime. In Dave Burgert's case, he should not have been restricted from weapons to begin with because he stole a horse. He didn't do it at gunpoint. At no point was a weapon charged, violence used. He borrowed a horse the night. He went hot rodding on a horse at the age of 17. What teenager doesn't do things stupid? Not justifying it, not rationalizing it, just saying there's a lot of people in the world of public opinion, the world of public finance, world of public business, government, who have done stupid things as kids, gone on with their adult lives, and never looked back. Well, this became an issue for Dave Burgert later on, which I'll explain, but I needed to explain that backstory of him. At any rate, he became a licensed process server. He was a glowing resume of community support. He had all kinds of, accommodations. He was part of a snow rescue operation here in the county. He had all kinds of community support and everything else that demonstrated he was a lawful and upstanding citizen and had gone on to be a good person in his adult life. But it's also being part of a licensed process server. He was en route on a day back in 2003, to serve papers which included, by the way, in content, naming Judge Katherine Curtis as a cocaine dealer. Now, I do not have personal knowledge of this, and I have to say that up front. I have, however, heard more than enough cases from dozens of different people that make me believe the credibility that our judges have routinely had alcohol and drug problems. Ted Limpus, and Katherine Curtis both have long-standing reputations of being dealers of cocaine, of other drugs. Judge Stuart Stadler was an alcoholic. Judge Allison, who's currently serving on the bench, also has a long history of alcoholism. Heck, Lori Adams, who's a city municipal judge right now, who was the prosecutor on my case, has a DUI issue, which I've talked about in previous videos. But the idea is substance abuse issues, very big problem in the government of Kalispell and Flathead County. So that she was being named and identified as a cocaine dealer in the content of this lawsuit, not a surprise to me. In my mind, and from what I've heard, the people I've spoken to over the last several years, as I've tried to gather information and try to find people who are willing to come forward and testify to their own experiences, this story is repeated persistently, consistently, over and over and over and over again. It is what it is. Therefore, I accept it, I believe it, and that's why I'm relating the information. It does not come from personal knowledge. It comes from recanting information that has been given to me from multiple sources who say the same thing repeatedly over and over and over and over again. So Dave Burgert was on his way to meet with the attorney and PI who were handling the lawsuit. They were going to coordinate the service of this complaint. As they met, they were intercepted by Kalispell Police Department officers, and then shortly thereafter, they were joined by Flathead County deputies, Flathead County Sheriff deputies. Now, the PI and the attorney were taken to the side. The police were in the process of taking them into custody. When Dave Burgert, who at the time chose to just sit there and wait to find out what happened, just basically go through the papers, try to, make in his own mind what needed to be done next, he's blindsided by an officer who comes up and sprays a full can, a large can, of OC-10, which is a kind of pepper spray, into his face. In fact, the actual official chemical that's used is called oleoresin capsicum. And as I said, it's a kind of pepper spray. It's toxic, and it's lethal if used in large quantities. Even the manufacturer recommends short 1 to 2 second bursts from 6 to 10 feet away. This was right up in Dave Burgert's face. It was a full can, emptied, you can tell it was empty, over a minute, just spraying him just persistently as he tried to pull away, as he tried to writhe away. They just kept spraying him until the can was empty. As he's sitting there trying to pull away, trying to get himself away from harm, just purely instinctive, and a deputy who actually had a restraining order placed against him because he had assaulted Dave Burgert in his own home months before, shows up, hyperextends Dave's arms, and as he does so, 2 other officers tackle him, bring him to the ground. He's spasming, contorting, unable to control himself, and of course, everyone starts shouting, resisting arrest. He's resisting arrest. The man is spasming. He has no control over his bodily functions. He's not resisting. He's convulsing on the ground. His face is peeling away from the chemicals poured into his face. It is literally peeling off. And we know all this because it was recorded. Both the attorney and the PI, as soon as they saw what was being done to Dave, picked up their phones and started recording what was being done. Now, in any other state of the Union, this would have been an immediate turning it over to the media. The media runs with this, and Kalispell Police Department's corruption is exposed. Right? Wrong. Along comes Frank Garner. Now, you all know my history with Frank Garner. If you've watched any of my videos, if you've read any of my blog materials, if you've read my book, it's on the back cover of my book, U.S. Political Prisoner Since 2003. It's there for everyone to see. Frank Garner is as corrupt as they come, and he's used his positions of authority and his connections to other corrupt officials to hide his corruption. And here he comes big as life, comes up to the PI and the attorney and says, nope, you can't have those. It's illegal to record my officers. And he's right. That's the sad and awful thing about this. He's right. Because the privacy and communications law says if they don't see it being recorded, it's considered concealed. They were too busy focusing on what they were doing to Dave to realize they were being recorded. Therefore, pursuant to the Montana court's interpretations, the recording was not seen by the person being recorded and therefore constituted a violation of the law, which permitted Frank Garner to come along and legally confiscate the phones. Now, of course, later the FBI gets involved and the FBI asks for the information. And conveniently, the Kalispell Police Department had erased the videos. FBI still turns it over to the NSA, still recovers the data, still brings it forward, but it's ruled to be, inadmissible in any of Dave Burgert's cases thereafter. The criminal prosecution that stemmed from this, claiming he was resisting arrest, claiming all of these issues of justification for his arrest and all of this, couldn't be disallowed, because it was recorded in violation of the Privacy and Communications Act. Gotta love that. It was also, by the way, disallowed in the federal courts, and I'm not really sure the reason why it was disallowed in the federal courts, but keep in mind the federal officials prosecuting Dave Burgert were Montana loyal people. They were people elevated from within the state of Montana to federal positions in Montana, and those were the people who were prosecuting Dave Burgert. They were not separate outside Montana people. They were people who were already pre-existing loyalties to Montana, who have spent their entire careers covering up the misconduct of officials in Montana. So it's no real surprise that they didn't allow it either. When another interesting thing is, not only are these videos existing, but there's a booking video that is eventually obtained by Dave Burgert and others, and it shows Dave Burgert sitting in a bench in the county sheriff's department, and he's sitting there unable to control his body fluid. He's defecating. He's just urinating. He can't control anything. He's just totally just completely lost control of all bodily functions. And he's sitting there on the video doing this. It's just, and his face is just peeling. You can see the peeling on his face. And in walks Frank Garner. And Frank Garner says to him, you've got to cooperate. They try to stand him up. He can't stand up. He falls to the ground. They decide they're going to put a gunny sack over his head and put a bungee cord around the gunny sack so his face is not being seen on the video. I can only presume that's the reason why they did it, because I can't imagine any other reason why to do that. But this gunny sack is placed over his head. It's tied around his face. So not only is he having problems breathing from the OC-10, not only is his skin being worn off, this gunny sack, which if anyone out there does not know what a gunny sack is a burlap bag. It is coarse material. It is absorbent, which means that it takes water. It doesn't repel water. It actually takes water into it. It takes moisture into it. It allows for breathability of things like potatoes and onions and other things that are stored in them typically. Well, this burlap sack is thrown where, of course, it attaches to the open sores on Dave's face. And here comes Frank Garner again after this, rips this off his face. His face is just bleeding because now the gunny sack has just ripped off the remaining parts of his face. He's absolutely bleeding all over the place. And he's ordered to cooperate. Well, he can't even communicate, much less cooperate. This video was also circulated, along with the recovered video the FBI recovered through the NSA's deep recovery efforts. It was circulated to media, to members of government. Everyone ignored it. Everyone ignored it. Nobody would cover it. Instead, they spun an alternate story. Dave Burgert was leading a militia, and Dave Burgert was running a militia called Project 7, who had ambitions to assassinate all the corrupt officials in Montana, in Kalispell. The judges, the sheriff, chief of police, everybody. Of course, this put the community completely in the belief that this guy is incredibly dangerous, incredibly dangerous. He's just so far off the rails. He's ready to overthrow the government. A later story I actually came across that was actually written a couple years after this. Uh, Added the details. Supposedly, they were going to knock over the lower. They were going to attack the federal government next. Their plan was to somehow, the 7 people, 7 people, were going to assassinate all the local people. Then take a standoff against the National Guard, and then try to overthrow the U.S. government. The story just gets wilder and wilder and wilder. When you don't have to have facts, the story just go on and on and on. 7 people were going to somehow overtake the entire country. Yeah, that makes incredible sense. But I think with Dave Burgert, that really makes it interesting is that, and the part I'm talking about here is the censorship. Because this recording existed, and it still exists out there somewhere. By the way, before I made this video, I actually tried to make an effort to see if I could find a copy of it on the internet. I can't. I've looked and I've looked. I've spent hours upon hours upon hours looking. I looked before, by the way. This wasn't the first time I went looking for this video. This was a renewed effort. I can't find the videos, either one of them. But they were circulated through media. They were circulated to government. They were circulated to a lot of different places before Dave Burgert got sent to federal prison. Dave Burgert spent several years in prison. Originally it was 10 years, but apparently he testified against one of the other members of the supposed militia, and in order to try to get a deal to get out. What he said or did, don't know. Don't know if it was true. I don't know the content of that interview. I just know that was the reason why he supposedly got out earlier. He went into federal supervision, which basically is federal probation and parole. And the problem is that Dave Burgert was paranoid at this point. He was incredibly fearful of government. And quite frankly, the idea that he was willing to say anything and everything to get away from government, to get out of custody, makes absolute sense. I mean, he was tortured horrifically on video. The video was suppressed. And then he turns around and he's released, and he's still under supervision of the government. So what does any sane man do if he's fearful for his life? He tries to protect himself. He tries to find ways to protect himself. Myself, I protect myself with information. I've been protecting myself with information. It's like the day I got out of prison, I've been publishing on my blog. I've been circulating information. I published a book. I'm creating this podcast. This is my protection. This is how I'm trying to protect myself, is I'm protecting myself with information. Dave Burgert apparently chose a less, not the best choice. He decided he was going to start hiding, concealing weapons, hiding weapons, stockpiling for his own protection. One man, keep in mind, this is not even a militia at this point. This is just one man. He was in a camp, and here come the authorities acting on a tip, supposedly, that he had guns. He saw them coming, took a gun, and ran. Allegedly, he shot at the officers as he ran away, and then ran into the woods. Officers in pursuit. Supposedly, they conducted a week-long search for him, couldn't find him, gave up the manhunt. 3 years later, Frank Garner and 2 different Flathead County Sheriff officers are openly declaring that he's dead. Now, their reasoning is supposedly because, well, he would not have remained off the radar this long. And their big story they spun at the time was that he was starting up his militia again, that he was going to once again renew his attacks upon the Flathead government, and that's what the tip was, and that's what they were pursuing, and that's why they went after him. One man, not even 7 people at this time. This is just one man. Supposedly going to do. Now remember, 7 people were supposed to take out the local officials, and then launch an attack against the National Guard, and then somehow take over the United States. As preposterous as that sounds, it's even more preposterous that Dave Burgert by himself was going to do this. Was going to restart what he did before, and start his assassination attempts, go back up against the National Guard, go back up against the United States government, and overthrow it by himself. Yeah, when you actually put it in perspective, it makes absolutely no sense. But somehow the public believes this because the news media told them, and the government told the news media, and so therefore that's what they run with. However, there is a story that has circulated for quite a while that Dave Burgert actually was killed in those woods. He was killed by the police officers who went in pursuit of him. And nobody reported it to media, to anybody else, because they didn't want the method of his death to be discovered. And the only reason why that would be if it was like a back of the head or some kind of just a brutal slaying. That, I mean, if it was just, hey, fugitive shot in an attempt to capture him, it would have been no issue. If there's a reason to hide the death, there's a reason to hide the body, and that's where this idea comes from. Not giving credibility to fact, only relaying what has been circulated out around about Dave Burgert. That he is in fact dead, and the reason why he is dead is because he was assassinated by the public officials who were afraid of him being out there, which was the very thing he was paranoid of. And I do agree with one point that if he was out there, I do believe he wouldn't have stayed underground all this time. He would have come up, we would have seen him, we would have heard from him. He would have published some kind of an expose. He would have published some kind of a something to tell his side of the story and get it out there. The fact that nothing has been forthcoming from him does suggest that he is in fact deceased, only because he's been completely silent. And this was back in 2011. So it's now 2021 when I'm recording this video, so that's over 10 years ago. If he's actually out there, he's done a very good job of hiding, and he's completely gone off the grid. Congratulations. I mean, you've successfully escaped the Great Montana Conspiracy. But to do so, you had to lose every aspect of who you are and what you're about to do it, but you got free. If you are out there, I say congratulations for escaping a huge conspiracy that I've been fighting since 2003. And apparently so have you. But I honestly believe he is deceased. I honestly believe that he would have surfaced at this point in time, or by this point in time, if he was not dead. But that said, the idea that his death is a result of being assassinated is of grave concern to me. Because, let's face it, if a government can assassinate someone with impunity, how are any of us safe? Look what they did with impunity the first time. They tortured the man. They permanently scarred his face. All for what? Because he was going to cooperate with serving a process on some. I'm not even, honestly, to tell you the truth, it was just the opening salvo of a lawsuit. The police and the sheriff's department didn't want that lawsuit served. They didn't want it proceeded. They didn't want the lawsuit to happen. That's the bottom line. Because they didn't want it to happen, they intercepted it before it could be served, before it could be filed, before it could be done, and they were able to spin the information back completely the opposite direction, create this big fabrication about a militia, Project 7, and go forward with it, and just completely just send it off the rails in the conspiracy realm theory. But the idea here is that the Privacy Communications Act is what was the impetus of Dave's case. Everything else that happened after his prosecution, the deletion of the records, the FBI's and the federal prosecution, all were steamrolled from the beginning of this act. If Montana did not have the Privacy Communications Act, and that this recording could have been circulated ahead of time, none of this would have happened to Dave Burgert. This would not have happened. His life would not have been destroyed. The true criminals, Frank Garner, the police officers involved, all of them would have been subjected to public media. And hopefully national media, because the local media would never cover it. Local media would find a way not to cover it up, the same way they did after, and this is what's important, is that Project 7 story started and it rolled and it steamrolled long before those videos were ever recovered, long before they ever circulated to media and government. By that point, they had already established their story. Dave Burgert was a militia person with the intent to overthrow the federal government. He was going to start local and work as a steamroll moving up the hill. And by the time Dave Burgert's innocence actually got to the media, actually got to government officials, Dave Burgert's story had already been written in the realm of public opinion. He'd already been condemned. He was a violent man out to assassinate people in government, and that was the story. And the problem is that this method of censorship is not unique. It's one of the methods by which Montana maintains censorship. In my case, they censored me and said I can't speak the name of my alleged victim. When in my second revocation attempt, they tried to use the fact that I missed her name one time in my published autobiography, just her first name, and used it to try to put me back in prison for a second time. The first time, the first revocation attempt, they tried to use the fact that I did use her name in my blog. They were not able to revoke me on that, so they went back and modified my conditions to put that censorship in, because I was out there, I was speaking, I was saying all this, and I had to go back and censor my entire blog to remove content or reference to her name or anyone else's name that was associated with her. So all this stuff went by the wayside because Kalispell didn't want that information out there either. They didn't know how to stop the blog. They didn't want people named and identified in the blog, so they started censoring. It happens to me. I'm sure it happens to lots of people out there in different ways. I'm not aware of anyone else who suffers the way I have suffered. I know dozens of people who've been intimidated and threatened by police and sheriff deputies alike that, about recording someone who doesn't know they're being recorded. I've been in court several times when the court has actually said that the interpretation is that if the person doesn't know they're being recorded, then it's considered hidden. It's being hidden from the person who's recording because they're not aware they're being recorded. And that has been used, and of course, and I should note this about the law, the interesting thing, the law actually makes an exception for officials in government. Officials in government can do this. They can keep doing it. They can record anything you do, I say, whatever, and this law doesn't even require them to have a warrant to do it. They can walk up to you and pretend to be something, do a drug bust, do whatever. They don't need a warrant because this law allows them. They don't need a warrant or probable cause or anything else. This law says they can do it because that's what the law says. That they are the exception to the rule. That so long as they're doing it in the course of their official capacity, they're allowed to do it. So it is what it is. I mean, this law is the offending language is so brief, but it's so broad-reaching, and it prevents anyone from actually recording the wrongdoing of officials. Now, I'm working with someone who's attempting to help me, thinking about putting together a documentary about my experiences and actually interviewing people who were involved in this case. My expectation is that we're not going to get anybody who's actually going to say anything, admit anything on tape. We're not going to get Frank Garner to sit here and go, yeah, Glick was stupid for filing the lawsuit. I had all the power and he had none. I took it all away from him. We're not going to get him to say that. He's bragged about it to enough people, but he's not going to say it on a known recording. And because of the law, the way it's written, we can't secretly record his conversation like you see NBC do, you see all the major networks do, you see any news coverage, these undercover exposés, and they're doing it all the time. Guys, by the way, don't come to Montana and do it, you'll be arrested. So yeah. And I could go on and on about this, but the idea here, the reason why Dave Burgert's story is indicative and important here is because this is an example of not a black person, a white person. Dave Burgert was white. By all reports, by the way, I've not actually seen, I've seen pictures of him. They're all black and white, the ones I've seen, but he does not look black or of any other nationality. He looks Caucasian from the pictures. But this is a crime was actually recorded in Montana, very well publicized. It was suppressed, it was ignored, overlooked, and it was used by the very corrupt authorities who committed the acts in the first place. And whenever you have a government that can do that, how do you possibly prove the existence of corruption? If you can't record them doing it, they're not going to voluntarily say, hey, watch how I shoot this guy and record me because I want to put it down for prosperity. Of course not. Watch how I spray Dave Burgert's face. Just watch what he does. Watch how he it's funny. Watch and record me while I'm doing it because I want to record. They're not going to do that. If they know they're being recorded, they're not going to act in this way. They wait till they're not being recorded, or they wait till a time when they can say, "I didn't know I was being recorded," and then they fall into that defense. We have to do better. We have to change the laws. In this state, we have to actually enforce the laws as they're written and as they're intended. In this case, I can't 100% say that the legislature intended the interpretation of this law as the courts have interpreted it. Honestly, hidden electronic or mechanical device seems to me to be something that's actually concealed from any visibility. I think the law needs to be clarified and take away this power from the state, but the legislature has remained conspicuously silent about modifying it, so which makes me wonder whether or not the legislature did intend it this way and they've not fixed it for a reason. Don't know. But the circumstances do not seem to suggest that the legislature is not somehow informed of this and is choosing to not do anything else about it. So anyway, as I wrap up this video, I do want to remind everybody that I am trying to raise awareness of this blog, or of this podcast. I keep saying blog, because for years I wrote the blog and now I'm doing a podcast. So forgive that I mix up the terms. But anyway, I'm trying to promote it. So obviously it's very important if you want to support the podcast, support the information that's getting out, have questions about it. By all means, ask me. I want the questions. I want, if you have suggestions or ideas about what I've said or want clarification on things I've said, by all means, let me know. I want to know. I want to hear. Anyone who's under supervision or in custody, please contact Bill Russell through the information that should be contained with this video. If it's not, please go to monspiracy.podbean.com to look to the original source. You can also get this information on YouTube. I verified the content is attached to that source. I've been trying to raise awareness of the YouTube platform, primarily trying to get more followers to that channel so that I can get into the circulation. Once I reach 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, I can actually take part in participation in the cross promotion that YouTube uses and allows me to my videos to become more circulated, more information, more exposure, and of course, obviously, that's where the ability to self-sustain this podcast comes in. Until that time, as I've mentioned in the past, I'm pretty much just using as pretty much low tech as I possibly can and still get a podcast out. I'm using an iPhone 8 to record this. I'm not using a sophisticated microphone. I'm not using a station. I'm not using a recording studio. This is what I have. I have a phone and I have a voice, and this is what I'm using. So hopefully when this information gets out there and you see this and you like this information, you'll say, hey, this is something I want to support. Please share this video, primarily the YouTube feed of this video. Encourage people to subscribe to my channel, and by all means, send me information and communication as you need to. Resources, donations, etc. are appreciated. They can be sent to me directly. Also, that information should be contained in my info blurb attached to this video. As always, please, if you're seeing this, and if at all possible, please remain free. Thank you and have a great day.